I just hit the record button, so it let me record it, so I just record it.
Okay, we're good then.
Yeah, sorry, probably had to be a co-host or something.
Oh, breakout.
So, all right, well, what I heard is we had about 23 in breakout, so we're gonna be a fairly large group. So we'll wait for a few more folks to pop in here.
Bigger
Mute yourself.
view.
Yeah, can you mute yourself
Sure.
too?
You guys ready for some snow? Some more snow? I know. I live in an apartment complex and they have not even shoveled out like in between the cars. So there's this big hump already. I'm hoping I don't break my neck this next few days.
My daughter teaches, and if there's a snow day on Tuesday, it will be 3 Tuesdays in a row, which if you're teaching in a hybrid model is a problem because that means she will not have seen, she's the music teacher. She will not have seen her kindergartners for 3 Tuesdays in a row.
I know. It's, I saw one of my moms, she had a wine glass that had lines on it. And there's a snow day, the wine glass gets fuller and fuller. All right, well, there's still 13 unassigned, but we'll go ahead and get started. As Kathy said, my name is Jenni Whitford. I serve on the C&O committee through the Presbytery, and I am the children's person at Worthington.
I don't know, dear.
I am filling in and kind of a last minute, but this is a topic that's close to my heart, so I feel somewhat confident to help with this, and we can grow and learn together. Just a couple kind of housekeeping things. We're going to watch some videos. We're going to watch a video and then we're going to discuss. And then we're going to watch another video and then we're going to discuss. And so some of this information you may be hearing for the first time. Some of it may make you feel uncomfortable or be hard to hear or be very challenging. So that's okay. That's where we're supposed to be. And I just would like to kind of just make sure it's a safe space for everyone to be able to speak and to hear
90,
and to respect one another.
490, but that doesn't have anything
So-
to do with it.
That's the one for this.
So I'm looking to see if there's anybody else unassigned. I don't think so. So why don't we have 27 people in our group. And so I don't know if it might take too long to introduce everybody because I've got 2 screens here going also. Yeah, so if you're not muted, if you can mute yourself and you can unmute yourself when it comes time for discussion. But in between, and I can mute you if you don't know how to. So without further ado, we are going to watch the first video is only 4 minutes long. It may be a video that you have watched before. I know there are some people who, this is a new topic. Some people have been doing this for a while already. If you were in the 21-day challenge that our Presbytery did, this is one video that was shown. It was also shown a while ago at a Matthew 25 gathering. It was introduced to me at that. So this could be your first time. It could be your third time watching. Oh, that's great, Tina. Perfect. You can say your name and your church in the chat. That's wonderful. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to watch the first video.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
Okay, that was a lot of information in 4 minutes. So let's talk about some of the vocabulary that you may be hearing for the first time. So redlining is something that I wasn't aware of until probably in the last year or so with some books and things that I read about. And the video explained that a little bit about how banks would loan money to people in certain areas. So are there other things people want to chime in about redlining? Any of you? Yes, go right ahead, Kathy. You have to unmute.
Okay, I grew up in a middle-class town in New Jersey, and and it was very strong with the north side, the south side of town, but it didn't have anything to do with racial things, I thought, until I started to notice that as I got older, probably middle school age, that there was only one Black family on the north side of town. So it wasn't until I was in college probably that I was home for Christmas break, and I went to the grocery store or something for my mother, and someone was standing outside asking to sign a petition on allowing real estate brokers or that people could buy a home, wherever in the town. And of course I signed it. And I came home and I told my parents, of course I signed it. And they looked at me and they were kind of quiet about it. And they just didn't say very much. They were surprised I would do that because my mother was involved in town youth activities and there were always Black kids on the boards of that and everything. But I just had that, I guess this was this implicit, unspoken thing. And later on, my son working on a PhD was investigating, researching redlining in the New Jersey area. And he just found it just all over.
Mhm. Mhm, thank you. Would anyone else like to share? George.
Hi, George Ritter, Mifflin Presbyterian. Actually, I was curious with the video. My wife and I have actually been redlined twice because of zip code. We used to live in Granville and we moved in here to the eastern part of Columbus, but it's the Whitehall zip code. It's 43213. And first is when we bought our new house, or bought our house ready to move, and we're switching over the house insurance. And the insurance man that I had kept, the guy in Granville there, and insurance man, I said, well, we can't insure your house. I said, why not? Because it says our records show that there aren't any houses that are worth what you paid for your house. I said, well, the bank disagrees. Well, anyway, I switched insurance companies, everything, and we've been insured ever since. The second thing was also about insurance. This time we got a letter from the state, from a license, just driver's license. I said, well, first year it came to me, to George, and I said, we'd like you to provide proof of insurance that your car's insured. I said, well, okay, so fine. I sent in this stuff. Well, about a year later, they came up to my wife. They said, well, we'd like you to provide proof of insurance. I said, and these are called random spot checks, it says in the letter. And so I sent it in, and on the back of it, and this was probably 10, 12 years ago, on the back of it, I write, so it's very strange. My wife and I, before we were married, we're just teenage drivers, whatnot, and so on. We've both been continuously insured for over 50 years. I said, I'm a little interested in these random spot checks. I would hate to think that you are randomly spot checking based on zip code. And I sent it. We haven't heard back ever since. So the second one was maybe a little specious, but the first time trying to insure our house, it was redlining.
Wow. And I thank you, George. I saw another hand. Was it the Hills? Do you want to share? Yes. Can you unmute? You got to unmute. Oh. There we go. There you got it.
I've looked at some maps of Columbus and have looked at areas where people who are classified as white live, and then everybody else. And you find that the everybody else parts of Columbus are to the east of I-71, largely. and those classified as white are to the west. And that has been a permanent fixture in Columbus for a long time. And it wasn't accidental because the I-71 was placed there in order to make sure that those neighborhoods were disconnected. But I teach English as a second language east of 71, and and my students are mainly Somali. And then I teach English as a second language way over on the west side, where it becomes less white, and students there are Hispanic. So that's a problem that needs to be resolved very, very much.
Thank you. And Tina?
This isn't just an urban issue. I grew up in Northern Ohio, and there were communities that put into place deed restrictions. So redlining isolates neighborhoods. Deed restrictions can prevent or could prevent entire populations from moving into a town or a city. And I don't want to mention the particular town of which I'm aware, but it is very close to Sandusky, Ohio.
Yes, thank you. And Charlotte?
To the freeways for just a second, for people who live in Columbus, one of the reasons why the freeways were cut where they were is those were low-income neighborhoods where people couldn't fight the freeway coming through. So like if they had tried to take that freeway like through Clintonville, for example, there's no way that would have happened, right? But they could take it through the American edition because people had fewer resources there because of this historic wealth problem.
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. So at Worthington, we had a guy from United Way speak. His name is Michael Wilkins. I'm going to try to get him to speak for us for our Presbytery because so I know it's basically Columbus, and I know that we have a lot of churches that aren't Columbus, but I think a lot of this, goes over, applies to all areas. But he talks about the white flight in the 70s, and I learned Columbus City Schools lost 30,000 students in 10 years. And you can imagine what that did. It just decimated the school district. So hopefully we'll be able to get Michael to come and he can share some more information about, which I think the racism and the poverty in many ways go hand in hand. So, I'm going to share, I should have started with this and I apologize, the Matthew 25 page on systemic racism. So let me share that with you. And you can see that, and you can go to it. You can go to it when you have time or to look around. So the Matthew 25, each area has its own page, and I'm going to scroll down so you can see along the side how to become one, resources, and then if you see they've got this focus 1, focus 2, and focus 3. So this is the focus 3 page here. Resources. One thing we do well in the Presbyterian Church is have resources, and more resources. I think you can find a lot of things here, but what I wanted to talk about, to look at right here, is when we talk about structural versus individual racism. And I know y'all can read, but I think the bullet points at the bottom are things to lift up. Housing discrimination, which we talked about, laws and policies that deny quality education, employment, and healthcare. Food, think of the food deserts where there's no grocery stores around, only check cashing places and liquor stores, or dollar stores. There seem to be a lot of dollar stores. mass incarceration, targeting people of color, stop and frisk laws. Somebody share a story with me that they have a dog that is kind of, I think it's like one of those big humongous poodles, so it looks kind of like a person with hair. She got pulled over 6 times with her dog in the front seat, and then before she had gotten her dog, had never gotten pulled over before. She had a black curly haired dog, and she found that very interesting. And then environmental racism, dumping waste and things like that. Think of Flint and their water. So again, this is a page, this is a resource that you can go to. You all are here, you have a great interest in this, and so you can scroll around in this section. Okay, and I will show you video 2. This is again another 4-minute video. And so the first time that I saw it, Kathy shared it with me yesterday. Here we go.
You might think racism in the US is really a case of a few bad apples. A racist cop here, a so-called Karen there, a leader of a white supremacist group. You know, people who deliberately hate. But we can't blame racism in America on just a few bad apples. Think of our nation's problem as more like an apple pie, with the racial injustice baked right into every aspect of our society. Meet Ebony and Emily, 2 American babies, one black, one white, born at the same time, same place, but Ebony will not get an equal slice of the pie, and that starts from birth. Because of her race, Ebony is 3 times more likely than Emily to die in the hospital as a newborn if her doctor is white. And once Ebony and Emily go to school, while both girls occasionally misbehave, studies show they won't face the same punishment. Ebony is 7 times more likely than Emily to be suspended, and 4 times more likely to be arrested on campus. When the 2 girls grow up and apply for jobs, odds are fewer employers will call Ebony back because she has a black-sounding name. And even though Emily and Ebony will get the same college degree, once Ebony is hired statistically as a black person, she'll make an average of 25% less than Emily. So why didn't Ebony get an equal slice of that apple pie? It's because systemic racism is built into our country's DNA. In the 17th and 18th centuries, wealthy white men needed land, so they took it from indigenous people and then forced blacks into slavery. To justify using blacks for free labor, the whites in power promoted a myth that blacks were inferior. And as Seattle-based author Ijoma Oluo points out, our nation's institutions, politics, and policies were designed against the backdrop of that money-driven lie that black people just weren't as worthy or as capable as whites.
Our school systems were built around this. Our economic systems are built around this. Our government systems were built around this. And it is simply that things were designed to uphold this story, to uphold this exploitation.
And even though slavery ended here more than 150 years ago, the racism that fueled it persists in systemic ways today. White Americans now hold 85% of this country's wealth. Black Americans, just over 4%, and Hispanics, just over 3%. People of color, people like Ebony, are statistically more likely to be impoverished, incarcerated, and face discrimination in healthcare. Emily may have her own barriers in life, but her skin color won't be one of them.
It's not someone said, here's your wealth because you're white. Here's your status because you're white. It simply means that the barriers that we placed in front of people of color were not placed in front of you. Now, you may have a whole nother set of barriers, right? You may have barriers of disability, barriers of class, barriers of immigration status, so many other barriers that were placed in front of you. But acknowledging privilege is simply acknowledging if we also took that other set of barriers that we place in front of people of color, you would stumble even further.
So even though you may not consider yourself a bad apple, a racist cop, a so-called Karen, or a member of an extremist group, Aluo says you may have played a role, even if you have the best intentions.
Instead of this whole, let's all learn to be best friends and love each other, you can love someone of a different race and ethnicity and still actively participate in their oppression based on how you vote, based on what you bring up in your office meetings, based on where you spend your money.
It's not too late to change the recipe of the most American apple pie.
Okay. Okay, so in this example, uh-oh. Sorry about that. Started auto-playing the next video. So we have, in this example, we have the two girls. One thing that was kind of new information to me was the medical issue. I don't know if that was shocking to you, but 3 times more likely to die if you have a white doctor compared to a black doctor. I was just at the APSE conference. APSE is the Christian Educators in the Presbyterian Church conference, and one of the speakers there talked about a family friend who had, I think, diabetes and was not to by her doctor, and she died because of that. And so that was something that was new, kind of new information to me. 7 times more likely to be suspended and 4 times more likely to be arrested. So I'd like to open up for some discussion with this video, things that struck you or observations that you made. Kim.
It's just interesting how it's just so pervasive and you don't think of it, you don't see it. And so like I work at a community college and I didn't, we try and be open access and so forth. And there's a verification process that goes on with people who are getting financial aid. And we've known for a long time that people who are poor get selected more for this verification process to prove what they're saying is true. And it's kind of time consuming and can make everything just take longer and make it harder to get financial aid. But it also came out this week that the education department has found that the Washington Post, has found that the education department has disproportionately selected students from majority Black and Latino neighborhoods. And it's just mind-boggling to me.
I think, I would assume most of us, all of us here don't put ourselves in the category of the Proud Boys or the KKK, but there are things that we probably don't realize or understand that we're bringing that implicit bias. That was a word that was introduced in the first video. Things that we think about that we don't even realize, like all Asian kids are smart, or all Black men are dangerous, or well, there's lots of other examples that we over time have brought into, or we've just learned or grown up with. And so recognizing that, and Kim, and sometimes it takes, unfortunately, being caught before anything is changed. And even then the change takes a very long time. Others? Tina.
I'm thinking around the educational system. I am a retired educator, and the state of Ohio did not record the piece about discipline and suspension did not require the reporting out of that data by subgroup until about the last 20 years. It came about at the same time that the state legislature started pushing for reporting of academic achievement on the proficiency test, for that to be reported out by subgroups instead of the whole group. And if people are wondering what the status of their school district policies are, one place to start is looking at the state report cards and the discrepancy of performance within those subgroups, whether they be special needs students, whether they be students of color, whether they are students who have social economic challenges, or those groups might overlap. So if you want to look at systemic issues in your local school district, start with the state report card, then maybe look building by building, because depending on which school your child is assigned to, you may see some discrepancies. But the other place is to approach the district, and I'm talking on the district level, and request discipline and suspension information. It's public record. You have a right to access that data. And if you have a concern about how your local school district is responding, that's one way to start.
That's great. I didn't know that. George.
Yeah, mentioning of the schools kind of triggered something that we do live in Columbus, and so we have Columbus City School District in our area. And one of the things about the schools, and why I think is so vital that the schools get back in session, you notice that they're starting with the K-5 or whatever, and as a very simple answer, food. The Columbus schools used to make it clear that they would not close on certain snow days back when, and some of them were bitter cold or this or that, and people were up in arms. But the superintendent at the time simply made the point, we have to get these kids warm and fed and safe. And if they're at home on a snow day, they don't head out to the ski slopes. You know, they may not eat. They may be in a home that isn't heated properly, and so on and so forth. And so beyond the socialization and the learning is simply the social services provided by Columbus Public Schools. And that's one of the reasons they're starting at K-5, to get these kids someplace warm and safe where they can eat.
Yeah. I think I saw Tori and Joel's hands up. I'm not sure, Tori, if I was correct, but Joel, did you want to share?
I just wanted to mention something that it's actually an observation that I'm pleased so far in this discussion. So often, I bet we've all witnessed either in our own self or just in these types of conversations, a typical defensiveness, particularly for those of us who get labeled white, that this isn't something that well, I'm not racist, right? And of course, the whole point of structural racism is to try to get it away from the personal. But what's saddened me so often in these discussions, particularly with Christians, is that you'd think that liturgically we're formed every week to be able to come and say, I've screwed up again. Every single week we come to worship and say, yep, I've done it again, right? And I need grace again. And yet for so many of us, that kind of posture does not translate to issues of race, right? Well, oh yes, I sinned, but I'm not a racist. And I'm convinced that if Hitler were alive today, he would believe himself by saying he's not a racist. No one says they're a racist.
Right.
No one. Right. None of these white nationalist groups think they're racist either. So, but for Christians who come every single week saying, I fall short and I need God's grace, we should be the ones by rights leading the way in terms of being non-defensive around these issues. So wanted to compliment you all for not being defensive and to allow that part of your worship life to inform this discussion as well. It's okay to have screwed up again this week in the things that you've done and the things that you left undone. So.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks. Tori?
I'm currently an educator. I'm a school counselor over on the east side of Columbus. And it is certainly our honor as educators to be able to serve our communities. And for those of you who are not and have not ever worked in schools, help us. Our society is in a place right now where families depend on schools for so much more than to teach reading, writing, science, and social studies. Because families, so many of them are in crisis. And so on the one hand, it absolutely is an honor to serve our communities in these ways. I don't think we're enough, we as the public schools. I know we're not enough. And so when you have opportunities, I think, to vote to support other social services in addition to the schools, please consider doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the problem does seem so big and so overwhelming. It's hard to know where to start, but I always start with kids because that's kind of where my heart always leads to, but there's a lot more that we can do. We're going to look at one more video. This video is a little bit longer. It's 17 minutes, so it is quite a bit longer. It is, there's a book. It's called The Color of Compromise. It's by Jamar Tisby. This is what it looks like. And this video will probably be harder than the other ones because this talks about kind of the complicity that our churches have and complicit in racism. And he has this whole book, and there is a whole site dedicated to this book with a video, kind of an introduction video to go with that. So again, this one may push a few more buttons, but that's okay. I think that's how we grow and learn a little. So let me share this one with you. Okay. So yeah, there's this introduction that he does on this piece, and I'll share these websites with you also. And then this is the video.
On September 15th, 1963, 4 young girls, Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley, prepared for Youth Day Sunday service at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. They were making final adjustments on their white dresses when the bomb exploded. The blast killed all 4 girls and injured at least 20 others. A newspaper report at the time indicated that all the church's windows had been blown out, except one. It showed Christ leading a group of children. The next day, a young white lawyer named Charles Morgan Jr. got up in front of a group of his peers and he asked them a question. Who did it? Who threw that bomb? The answer should be, we all did it. In that very statement, Charles Morgan Jr. gets at the essence of complicity. You see, the most egregious acts of racism can only occur within a context of compromise. History and scripture teach us there can be no reconciliation without repentance, and there can be no repentance without confession. There can be no confession without truth. The Color of Compromise tells the truth about the American church's complicity in racism. Why did we call this video series The Color of Compromise? Well, because it tells the truth about the American church's complicity in racism. And that word complicity is important. It's going to be important throughout this series because it gets at the idea that not every Christian was this foaming at the mouth racist.
Not everyone was burning crosses or putting on white hoods and robes. Not everyone was attending or cheering on lynchings or anything like that. But it does speak to the notion that throughout the course of U.S. history, when Christians had the opportunity to decisively oppose the racism in their midst, all too often they chose silence, they chose passivity. The refusal to act in the midst of injustice is itself an act of injustice. Indifference to oppression perpetuates oppression. Sometimes I ask myself, why did I ever talk about a topic like racism in the church? It's just not a popular topic. But it's really because I love the church and I want to see the church become healthier. I like the way Martin Luther King Jr. put it. He said, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. So in a similar way, I want to reveal the truth about the American church's complicity with racism, to uncover it and expose it to the light of attention. And in that way, perhaps we can begin to heal these wounds. Before we get going any further, a lot of people use the term racism, but never really define it. I want to make sure that we're clear up front by what I mean by the word racism. I borrow from an author, Beverly Daniel Tatum, and her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? In that book, she says racism is a system of oppression based on race. Or a more shorthand definition, it's prejudice plus power. Notice in both of those phrasings, there's a focus on power and systems. That racism enacts itself not just in interpersonal ways, but through institutions and policies. Now, there are notable exceptions, but historically speaking, when it comes to racism in this prejudice plus power form, in this system of oppression based on race, white churches have chosen to practice a complicit Christianity rather than a courageous Christianity. In fact, complicity might be kind of a weak word. Historian Carolyn DuPont puts it this way. Not only did white Christians fail to fight for Black equality, they often labored mightily against it. Christians often proactively helped create a social caste system based on race. That's what we're going to talk about through means of a historical survey. Now, when I looked at other studies of race and racism and the church, what I noticed is that very few of them took history as the main vehicle to convey their point. And so I thought it would be important to focus on the ways that American Christians actually acted in the past in ways that showed complicity with racism. But this is a historical survey, and a survey is simply an introduction to further study. And this is especially true in this series. There are going to be a whole lot of authors and books and examples and events and people that I mention. And I'll not be able to give you all the details about each one of those things. So use it as an invitation to further study. A survey focuses on breadth, not depth. So I give examples from every period of American history in order to show how deep and pervasive the problem of racism and the church goes. Furthermore, I want to say up front that we're going to focus on Black-white race relations. And this doesn't mean that other people groups aren't important. What I do is try to focus on what I know. And so I studied the Black-white racial divide, and I try not to speak on that which I haven't studied as much. I also think that these racial dynamics between other groups are worthy of their own studies and their own research. I also think that as we study the Black-white racial divide, it will give us clues about how to deal with other racial and ethnic divisions in society. So no matter what your personal racial or ethnic or national background, I think you can find some principles in this series that are going to apply to your particular context. As we go throughout this historical survey, there are a couple of themes that are going to come up again and again. One is that this historical survey of race in the American church reveals contingency. It's the idea that things didn't have to be this way, that throughout history, individuals and groups made choices, deliberate choices, and they could have made different choices. History is contextual, and certain people, certain organizations did make particular decisions, but they could have made other choices, and then our past would have been different than what we see it as now. The second theme is this: racism never goes away, it just adapts. I think part of the problem in understanding race in the American church is this idea that racism is simply a problem of the past. Now, that's especially dangerous as we go throughout a historical survey and we talk about the past a lot, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that there is no more racism today. So we'll talk about throughout the video series how racism has changed forms throughout the era of slavery and then later Jim Crow segregation and now what I call a racialized society. But it never goes away. It just adapts. So why do we need to talk about race and religion, or race in the American church? Well, again, quoting Martin Luther King Jr., he said, "There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love." And I want that to come through in this video series. I love the church, but I hate racism. And I think we need to talk about it. And we need to talk about the ugly truth of racism in the American church's past, not to tear down the church, but in order to build it up. The Bible talks about speaking the truth in love for a purpose, that the body might grow and mature and be strengthened, and the body is the church. And so we talk about racism and the American church in order that the body might be healthy. Now, as we talk about racism and the church, there's a distinct divide. I say the church, and that's a massive term. It means a lot of different things and it encompasses a lot of different people. But when I say the American church, I'm really talking about the white church as it relates to Christian complicity in racism. And I don't get enough opportunity, unfortunately, in this particular series to talk about the black church. But I do want to pause and speak a word about the black church. Historically, the black church has been the ark of refuge and safety for black people. I'll say this in later segments, but the sad reality is that there would be no black church without racism in the white church. And the black church has received black people and nurtured black people in the midst of a society that endured slavery and permitted segregation and all kinds of brutality perpetuated against people of African descent. And in the midst of this, the black church has formed its own traditions, its own beauty, its own history and heritage and legacy. And so many of us are indebted to the black church. And I think we should learn more about the teachings of black church traditions today. The black church has been indispensable in both the past and the present of black people to ensure their flourishing. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be a difficult video series for many people. It's going to be hard to get through. It's going to be challenging, and that's for a lot of reasons. So there's a certain group of people who are going to object to the very premise that Christians have been complicit in racism. They are going to completely disagree with the idea that Christianity has somehow been a force that helped construct a racist society. They'll call studies like this and the ideas I'm proposing too liberal. They'll compare it to a Marxist communist ideology. They'll say it relies on critical race theory rather than the Christian teachings or the Bible. They'll say that calls for social justice are somehow abandoning the gospel. Or they'll point to counterexamples of Christians who resisted racism. I've heard it all. But what's going to become apparent throughout this series is that any of those rebuttals are actually pretty common. You see, Christians throughout the course of U.S. history who have attempted to fight for racial justice and against racism, they heard the same kind of objections too. And so for folks who do object to the very premise of a video series like this, I simply say, it's here when you're ready. This information is important. These events happened, and as Christians, we have to deal with it, and we have to deal with our complicity in racism, both historically and in the present. This video series is going to be hard for other people for different reasons, though. There are going to be a lot of folks, I assume, who have to unlearn a narrative that you've been taught since childhood, a narrative that was given to you by trusted leaders like parents or pastors, theologians, and other people. And so it's going to take time to reframe your focus to see racism in all its ugliness and truth. I think sometimes you might even have to pause to absorb the facts of the American church's racial history. It is hard, tragic, heartbreaking history. And as humans who are at all empathetic, we're going to be hurt and pained by that. And so it's okay if you have to stop and think about things, take a break, and let it sink in. This is soul work, and it can't be rushed. Now, when I write about these things, and particularly if you are a white Christian, you might feel like this is all just a big guilt trip. It's all designed to make you feel bad about things you may not personally have been involved with, but are sort of on the receiving end because of your racial group. Well, the goal here is not guilt, but I wouldn't mind if we all experienced a bit of godly grief. In 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 10, Paul writes to the Corinthians and he says, "For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret." So the idea of godly grief here is that there are things in our past to grieve over, to weep over, to lament about when it comes to racism and the American church. It's the idea that as a people who follow Jesus Christ, we haven't done enough. We haven't done what we should have when it comes to fighting racism, and that should produce in us grief. But a certain type of grief, a grief that leads to change, a grief that leads to confession and repentance so that the future might look different, might look better than the past. Now, this entire series is looking forward, and it's based on God's vision for the church. I love Revelation 7:9. It says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb." In that heavenly congregation, we finally see the culmination of God's gathering a diverse people who are unified by their faith in Christ. But this is not just a distant reality. It's not something that we can only hope for in heaven. Jesus commands us to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And that command certainly would include a gathering of people from all nations and tribes as best we can right here and right now, and to work toward that. In Ephesians chapter 2, it talks about Jesus Christ breaking down the dividing wall of hostility between the followers of Jesus Christ. And that's a reality that we must live into even now, even today. Peace between racial and ethnic groups is not something we have to achieve. It has to be received by faith and lived out. But historically, we haven't lived out these truths. Not enough, and I don't think with enough urgency. The reality is the church needs the carpenter from Nazareth to deconstruct the house that racism built and remake it into a house for all nations. My hope for this video series is that you would move from being actively racist or even passively racist to being actively anti-racist. What we need is a generation of Christians who will intentionally and in a sustained way consciously fight against the racism that still pervades our society. And so these lessons are a call to abandon complicit Christianity and move toward a courageous Christianity.
Okay. So as you gathered, that there's a whole series on this book. So the book, which I'm happy to loan anybody, I'm at Worthington if anyone wants to borrow my book. But the book walks you through colonial times, to the American Revolution, to Civil War, to Civil Rights Movement, to today. And it's excellent reading, and I highly recommend it. So The Color of Compromise. I also want to lift up to you, there is a series on PBS that is, I think it's Monday and Tuesday. Is it the Black Church in America? I think it's called.
It is.
Okay.
It's February 16th and February 23rd. It's 2 parts. And it's on WOSU at 9 p.m. I think those are actually Tuesdays.
Okay, perfect. If you go to the pbs.org website too, there is there's trailers and intros to this series. There's a whole study guide I found on it as well, that talks about the Black Church in America. So I'm looking forward to that series. Before we kind of start to wrap up, I'm so thankful that you all are here. I do recognize, and I want to acknowledge, we are white, right? There's not one person of color on this chat today. And so we have work to do when it comes to structural racism in our own houses and in our own places of worship. So some hard conversations. Before we finish would anyone like to chat or bring up points from the video? Charlotte.
You prompted something in me just a minute ago. So I went to Next Church last year in Cincinnati and discovered our denomination is it's not just white. I mean, I think white people in the PCUSA have this conception that we are a white denomination, and there is a very powerful, vital Black church within our denomination that I had never been exposed to. And I've grown up Presbyterian, and I just think we need to open our eyes to that fact, because we have sisters and brothers in our denomination that we can learn from and be in community with in a very profound way. And I will make a personal confession. I felt very defensive the first couple of days or the first 24 hours of Next Church, because I was kind of confronted with the issue of racism within the church. And I'm a former social worker. I mean, it was just startling to me, but we kind of forget that our denomination is divided in this way.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all split the whole church after the Civil War, right? We didn't get back together until the 80s. So I saw a couple other hands. Rebecca.
I would encourage people to go to Bethany Presbyterian Church on a Sunday, experience what their worship is like. And then when we, get together again, you might go to Ramsayer Presbyterian Church for the Africa experience, although be prepared for like 2 to 3 hour worship.
For sure. For sure. Paul, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was curious what the percentage of Black versus white Presbyterians are within PCUSA. And then I was also curious, the first couple of videos, they cited certain quote unquote facts, but they didn't back it up with statistical data. If there was some point of reference we could go to confirm what we were being told is actually true based on statistical data, they bring up instances where a white or Black individual was growing up in the same circumstances, but I was wondering what they have to support what they were saying.
Sure. I don't know. I don't know where the data is for those particular facts from the videos are, if they're linked in with the videos. I did in the chat put all of the videos that I showed you. So if you want a little research, and Joel's typing some stuff in, and I can probably look up pretty quick what the racial percentages are in the PCUSA if someone else wants to share. I see George's hand.
Yeah, last year at the PI event, when we were live there at Worthington,
yes,
I think the comment was made that PCUSA is 91% white. Also about Bethany and Ramsire, when I was what used to be known as Committee on Ministry about 10 years ago, both those churches were under my wing, so to speak. And what's interesting, Ramsire is a Ghanaian church, Ghana. So they have that homeland interest, and they're actually nationally known because of that within the community. Bethany is an interesting church in that it is almost within the shadow of Broad Street. If you go on Garfield there, I think it is, or some street like that, you go about 3 blocks north and you'll get to Bethany, and it's sometimes they provide parking for the King Center there, King Arts Complex. What's interesting about Bethany is it's actually a magnet church. Many of their communicants, it's extremely predominantly African American. They live in the suburbs. They'll drive from Worthington and Dublin or even Delaware. They've gone out, most of them are professionals, young professionals. They still come to church there because it's where they grew up. It's just part, and they support it, and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting dynamic. And yes, as Becky pointed out, the worship experience is different from what you might see in a traditional Presbyterian church, if you will.
All right, thank you, George. I'm looking for other hands. Kathy. Oh, Kathy, you're not unmuted. Sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Is this video series, is this available through the PCUSA?
The Color of Compromise?
Yes.
No, in the chat, this series was shared with me. It's on Faith Gateway. So if you want, what I do with the chat is I copy everything and paste it into a Word document. I know there's another way to do it, but if you want to save all that stuff that was in the chat just a few minutes ago, I just highlight it all and save it. And then we'll post all 3 of these sessions were recorded today, and will be available on the website later to watch. And I assume all the notes that were in the chat will go along as well. I have not watched the series of The Color of Compromise. I didn't even know there was a series. So I'm kind of excited to watch the rest of that. We're at our time. It's 11:27. I know that Kathy is particularly interested in topics and speakers that you may have suggestions for. I know the CNO committee, we're always looking for some different voices. So please share those with us if you have a suggestion. And I thank you so much for coming and not booing me because I wasn't James Brown. So thanks for joining. If you would like to, you can pop back into the main thing, but let's close with a word of prayer real quick. Loving God, thank you for this day, and thank you for this group of people who love you and love others in the church and outside of the church. Be with us this day, open our eyes, open our hearts, and push us to be uncomfortable and to speak up where we need to. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Hi, folks. we're pretty much done with our event. If you have things you'd like to share, we'd love to hear them. But other than that, we're glad you joined with us.
I heard that the person that led the racism was awesome.
Oh, I did too. I mean, my phone has been blowing up. Totally. I can't keep up with the tweets and the Instagram. I even got a TikTok on you doing a little something. I don't know what it was, but it was pretty awesome.
It's kind of hard to have the two. First of all, I only had like two people on a second screen. Joel, you were one of them, and so it was kind of hard. I wanted to look at people's faces, so that was a little bit challenging. But everyone was really engaged, and so
great.
It went pretty good.
How was the last video? Well received?
I think so.
That's the one I think probably fewest people had seen, is my guess.
Yeah, and so I told them that we'll put the link up because there's a whole series that he put out, and so and I told anyone that wanted to borrow my book, I said, let me know and I'll loan it to you. So I think it struck a lot of people, and we also talked about the PBS special that starts next week on Black Church in America.
I don't know if you saw on I think it's CBS. They're doing a little ad that they've got a news story Monday at 6 on the effects of the interstates in Columbus.
Oh.
And how they went through, Black communities. I can't imagine if it's part of the 6 o'clock news, it'll be a terribly long story, but again, it would offer a different, very local insight, perhaps, that we hadn't seen before.
the OSU Neighborhoods series they did years ago on King Lincoln has an excellent, that's a big part of the King Lincoln episode, is 71 splitting King Lincoln district and the economic and social destruction that followed. It was very eye-opening. First saw that several years ago.
I mentioned in my chat too, I found out the name of that guy from the United Way that led at Worthington. And so I'm going to reach out to him to see about maybe presenting something on one of these Saturday events. And he talks about the white flight from Columbus schools and also the impact at the highway. And he knows his stuff. He's got his data, and he lives like in Linden because he wants to live right in the neighborhood and be a part of the neighborhood. So
right. Great, good. Well, glad it was good. Well, again, folks, thanks for joining. We're officially done, although I think Jenny tells jokes or juggles. I can't remember. Which one do you do?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, Jenny's gonna hang around, and Tina can hang around too if she wants, because our other speakers are gonna hopefully jump on, and we'll take a second. Thanks a lot for being a part of it, Joel. Appreciate it. So yeah, we technical difficulties. I still have the name Robert Four, although I already sent him to a group. So I think he was on 2 devices, and I don't know how to do that without, I don't want to bump him off because I was afraid it might bump his other.
Sure. I ended up recording because Tina didn't have co-host privileges, and it was just easier for me to hit the record button. So I'll see you today.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Forgot about that part about doing the recording. Folks, we're jumping on now. It's lovely to see you. We're officially all done. But we're going to meet with the leaders real quick to run through things. If you've got any 2 cents you want to throw in, feel free. But otherwise, we're just glad you were a part of our event today. We are looking at, as I said, very seriously for suggestions of what else is helpful to your church, wherever you are along the spectrum. And so, we want to, how can we be most helpful? One of the analogies that we've used in a previous gathering, I don't remember which one, talks about in a lot of work for whether it's poverty work or racism, anti-racism work, that it's kind of like a highway, and you've got folks who can't even aren't even on the highway yet, or they're just entering the on-ramp and they're really cautious. And you have other folks who are in the speed lane zipping by. And so we want to be sure that we offer as much help as we can to everybody on that spectrum, you know, and this sort of event is more for folks who are just getting started, who are just getting on the highway, whether it's racism work or anti-poverty work. Congregational vitality is in a little bit different category because usually churches at least say they want a more vital congregation. Whether they're really willing to do the work to make that happen or not is always the big question, I think. So, so I'm delighted to have anybody else stay or give their 2 cents if they want. Otherwise, I think Stephanie and Jenny and Tina and I are going to be talking. Yeah, Nancy, you're muted though. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's possible to listen to a recording of the other 2 breakout sessions.
That is the hope. The hope and plan is that we will have all of the workshops posted.
Great.
And so you'll be able to go, you'll be able to listen to everybody else's. That's the plan. How it comes to fruition, we don't know that yet. So, so for folks who are just hopping on, the event's officially done. If you have 2 cents you want to share, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, we're just kind of gathering the leadership to sort of debrief what we talked about. But would love to hear from you if you've got, particularly for suggestions on other events that would be helpful to your congregation in terms of congregational vitality, structural racism, or systemic poverty. So if you have some ideas, suggestions, you can tell me now, you can send me an email. But otherwise, we're officially done for the morning. So yeah, that's what I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Glad a lot of you could be a part of this. So Katie, did I finally get you able to record yours? You're muted.
No, but I copied the chat and I decided what I told them I would do is I'll go on to Zoom and just talk through the slides and we'll just post that.
I don't know why. I don't know. I mean, when I undid you, I just couldn't get you done again. So
yeah. So I took some notes about the comments that people made. So I will try to include those when I do the spiel.
Oh,
so no worries.
That'd be awesome. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Stephanie, how did yours seem to go?
I think it went fine. You know, I spent a lot of time just talking about and educating people on the basics of poverty and housing, eviction. I wish I'd had more time at the end to talk about solutions, although those are really tough. It's tough to say, you know, here are some specific things that we can do to fight systemic poverty, because that's such a big, intractable issue. So I tried to talk about that a little bit, but anyway, so I think it was fine. It's hard to know. I'm not a good judge of my own presentations.
Well, we certainly appreciate you doing it. And yeah, it was nice. It had a great variety, I thought. And like I said, it was really very evenly split between the 3 tracks of racism, poverty, and congregational vitality. So I'm hopeful that moving forward, we'll have folks who are interested in, you know, the sub pieces.
And isn't it just amazing? I mean, on a Saturday morning, I know Zoom, so it makes it a little different. You don't have to get up your whole day, but almost 90 people today.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
You know, people want to learn and they want to change things. They know things are wrong and they're looking for solutions and ideas. So I'm thrilled. I take it as a win.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I think Katie, at one point, I think you'd said 50 was your happy spot for the event.
So yeah, I'm giddy now. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So good. So again, Stephanie, and of course, Stephanie, I don't know if the rest of y'all realize, Stephanie's doing a presentation at PW event.
Oh,
yeah.
So we doubled up with her. So we'll have to tell folks if you want to hear her live, so to speak, to jump in on that PW event. So
nice.
Yeah, I obviously wasn't there, Stephanie, but I know you. The way your heart and your brain are connected on this, I'm sure it was gold. I can't wait to see it.
Oh, thanks, Katie. I appreciate that.
And I think Jackie said she was gonna record yours, and Jenny did hers, and Katie's gonna redo hers.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah, because I've had people who, already asked, can they see
Right.
everybody else? And
Right.
can they get on to the ones that they didn't see before? And for people who were watching the impeachment trial instead of coming here, no other comment other than that.
Why would you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, good. So we've got for the 13th, then Tina, you're on just roundtable share, and I got Bob Gustafson from West Berlin. I have emails out to Trip Porch for either Granville or Indianola, if he has a suggestion, and then Rob Martin in Athens.
Great.
To see if they can find folks and or do it. Again, I want to have a nice variety. I don't want to all be pastors. Of course, it could be all men because we didn't have hardly any men on this one, so we probably need a balance. That was an accident, just so y'all know. We hadn't intended to be a totally female project here.
No, thank God for Joel. We had our token male.
I gotta get out of here.
As we gear up for March,
Hi, Jenny.
we need a little more